I've been a fan of EDM, electronic dance music, longer than the term EDM has existed. And one of the reasons I enjoy that type of music is because artists who create EDM, in addition to their own creations, often rework the material from other people. Either adding a different beat, making it faster or slower, or adding vocals or taking away vocals, remixing, making it longer. There's all sorts of variations that different people do. And sometimes you don't like the remix as much as the original, but that's fine. You got the original that still exists. And sometimes it's even better. It just gives you something that you like and takes it in a new direction. And often you can enjoy that remix a lot longer than the original. Sometimes because the remixes will be 5 times as long. So it gives you more of the thing that you enjoy rather than just hitting replay over and over again. My favorite song of all time, Radio Babylon by the band Meat Beat Manifesto, reworked by The Orb in the Beach Blanket Bingo remix. It's about 13 minutes long. It's so enjoyable. I've listened to that thing at least 500 times. My favorite track of all time. It's great for going to sleep. It's great for driving. Great for keeping you awake, revving you up, bringing you down, whatever. It's perfect. Perfect. Now, I bring all this up because some people accuse designer Reiner Knizia of remixing his works as if that's a bad thing, as if that's something to avoid, whereas I look at it as something interesting. Because games don't exist only in one form. There's lots of different forms that designs take when a game designer comes up with something. And then they make choices and pare down to whatever is created, or they add on, as the case may be. There is some bolting, there's trimming, there's taking away, there's resetting, retheming, there's all sorts of stuff going on to make a finished work. But that's not the only form that a creation has to take. You could have taken different choices and gone a different way, where we use dice instead of cards, and we make it 5 times as long. We add voices, we take voices away. There's all sorts of things that you can do to this game to make it the same and yet different. And often those remixes will be more enjoyable than the original, and if not, you've still got the original. So I don't see it as a bad thing, and I bring that up in particular for this video because I'm talking about Babylonia, designed for 2 to 4 players from Spanish publisher Ludo Nova, that will be first widely available at Shield 19. This game has elements of Knizia's Samurai and Through the Desert kind of mixed together in different ways, and yet it's its own thing. If this game had come out first, then Through the Desert would be seen sort of as a copy of it, and each one can stand alone, and they provide slightly different experiences in how they play out. So let me show you how this one works in particular. Here's the game board for Babylonia, set up for a 3-player game. The setting of the game is Mesopotamia, and you have the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers running through the playing area. This game is not identical, does not share gameplay with Knizia's Tigris and Euphrates. They have the setting in common, but not really the gameplay, although you can probably see elements of that coming through. Let me talk about how the game works, and you'll see what you think. You use the entire board with a 4-player game. With 3 players, you leave out the north area and use the Tigris River south. With 2 players, you use the Euphrates River north. You'll have 3 to 5 ziggurats based on the number of players. And then you have an assortment of city tiles and crop fields. And you lay those all out at random on the indicated spaces on the board for a variable set up in each game. Each player has a set of 30 tokens. And in those tokens, you have 12 farmers, 6 civil servants, 6 priests, and 6 merchants. You take all those tokens, you put them face down in front of you, and then you draw 5 at random and put them on your rack, making them available for play. So you'll have a random assortment from the 30 tiles in your collection. The rack's a little touchy, where things sort of stick, sort of stand up well. It's a piece of wood that has 2 slots in it. It's an interesting take on a rack where it's very minimal and folds down. It doesn't even fold down. It's flat in the box, so it doesn't take up that much space. On a turn, you are going to place 2 or more of your tokens on the board. You can place 3 or more farmers face up on land areas, on unoccupied land areas, so you can't place them directly on a crop field or a city or a ziggurat, but unoccupied land areas. Or you can place any 2 tokens face up on land or face down in the river, or a mix of both. And placing them face down in the river seems a little weird, but You're not killing them and throwing them in the river, but setting up a presence for your clan in the river. You're still important there. So there's no rhyme or reason to why you might place somewhere, or at least there's no restrictions on why you might place somewhere. So I can place down here, I can place here, and then I refill my rack. You're going to be placed because you're going to try to score points in different ways by connecting different things. So first thing to think of, the crop fields with numbers can be claimed. If you have a token adjacent to one of those crop fields, you can then place a farmer to harvest those crops, and you'll get 5 to 7 points, whatever the number is on that tile, and you leave your farmer in that space. So I take this, I get 7 points. I still place a second token on my turn. Let's say I place this one here. When you place next to a ziggurat, you score points equal to the number of ziggurats where you have tokens adjacent to them. In this case, I'm next to 1 ziggurat, I get 1 point. On my next turn, maybe I decide, sure, I want to get more ziggurats. So place here, I'm next to 2 for 2 points. I'm next to 3 for 3 points. And I can keep going and score more and more points until, of course, the ziggurats are completely surrounded and they're not available to me anymore. Keep in mind, of course, that I am skipping other players' turns. Haha. You are going to be placing tiles as well around cities and ziggurats, and those score when all of the land spaces around them are filled. So a city might have a river adjacent to it, but if you're placing tiles around the city and it gets occupied just on land, it will score. Maybe something is in the river as well for one reason or another. That's not necessary. This will score if these 4 are filled regardless of those 2 rivers. When a city scores, each player is going to look at their tokens that are next to it or connected with a chain to that city. So in this case, you're looking for the priest and the civil servants. White has none of those. White made very poor choices with my random tile grabbing, and they scored no points. I have 2 tokens that match, and I scored 2 points for each of those, so 4 points. I have more tokens around this city than any other player, so I collect this city, and I put it in front of me, and all players score 1 point for each city that they've collected. So initially, cities don't score much, but the first one you collect will score multiple times over the course of the game. So you can try for a strong city strategy. You can try for a ziggurat strategy by placing lots of tokens surrounding the ziggurats. You can go collect the crop fields for early points in a one-shot manner, or build up for later. There's all sorts of different ways that you can go. So I claim that city tile, and now this space is empty and can be occupied on a later turn. Perhaps later in the game, I'm going to put down farmers here. I'll put down a farmer here. And now I've added in another priest to my chain. So when this city is surrounded, now white is going to score 2 points for its 1 priest. Blue will score 6 because it has a chain of priests connected by your clan members to this particular city. White will claim the token, which is worth 1 point, but you will score 1 point for that token that you collected earlier. And now 2 cities have been claimed. If there's a tie for cities, then that city token is thrown out of the game and no one scores any points for cities, but you still score for the icons that you have in that chain. So cities will disappear over the course of the game as people claim them, and ideally you make chains of tokens that will score multiple times for particular cities. So here you've got merchant, 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 merchant. So if someone's paying attention, they will set up a chain of merchants that will score multiple times for those cities when they're resolved. But of course, if other people are paying attention, they will block you. Otherwise, I'm going to score 6 points for the merchants here, and then 12 for the merchants and civil servants here, and so on and so on. So you have to keep watch and try to break up people as they're making chains across the board. Ziggurats score in a different way when they're surrounded. And again, they can be surrounded only on the land. We go here. Or perhaps there'll be someone in the river as well. But however it's surrounded. Once all the land spaces on a ziggurat are surrounded, well, you don't score any points directly for that. Instead, whoever has a majority of tokens around that ziggurat gets to take one of the bonus tiles in the game. And bonus tiles are kind of a weird thing for Knizia. I mean, he's done them in different games. You can think of Amun-Re, where you're scoring for different things as a bonus, but these feel different. I don't know. It feels like a unique thing for him. Although I'm sure with 700 games published under his name, you can pull out examples. So, white player here gets one of these 7 bonus tiles. You can get a one-off 10 points immediately. You can have 7 tokens in your rack for the rest of the game, giving you more choices over what you're going to play at different times. Or perhaps you build up and have a big 6-farmer ambush to connect lots of things all at once. You can get a one-off token that gives you an extra turn. You just hold it until you want to use it. Or you've got some other unique powers that you can use multiple times depending on when the situation arises. With this one, you can play one of each of the 3 noble tiles, the priest, the civil servant, and the merchant, at the same time. So if you have all 3 of them, you can play one of each. With this one, you can use nobles and place them onto a crop field to claim that crop field. You don't need to place a farmer there anymore. You can reserve your farmers for that big shot where you're going to put them all across the board at once. With this one, you can put out any number of farmers and 1 noble tile in addition to the farmers. With this one, each pair of cities that you have will get you an extra bonus point each time that cities score. There's 2 additional tiles that they suggest you don't use in the initial games. One provides automatic connections across the rivers. So if I had a situation like this, these would be considered connected because it's across the river here. The other one makes the middle land section an automatic connection. So if I have tokens here and here, well, this is considered connected as well. Although this guy would be face down in the river. Okay, so when the ziggurat's surrounded, you get one of these bonus tiles, and then you continue play, and the ziggurat just sits there, doing nothing for the rest of the game. You keep taking turns until one player has played all of their tokens on the board, in which case you finish that turn and the game ends, or when all but one city, or all the cities, have been claimed. So if there's 0 or 1 cities left on the board at the end of a player's turn, that ends the game. If someone uses all their tokens, that ends the game. There is no end-game scoring. You just see who is ahead at that point in time, and that player wins. There's an overview of Babylonia, which I played 5 times on our review copy from Ludonova, 4 times with 2 players, once with 3 players, and it feels like the game is more complicated to explain than it is to play, mostly because you can play not having any idea what you're doing. I'm just going to put tokens down on the board and see what happens. Maybe I surround a city, maybe I don't, maybe I score with a ziggurat, maybe I've got a plan for what bonus tile I want to take from the ziggurat, maybe not. You can play randomly and probably do really poorly, or you can play with some sort of goal in mind, whether you're going to specialize in cities, specialize in ziggurats, specialize in chaining things together so that you score tokens again and again as cities are completed. One last tile I didn't mention is the crop field that has this square symbol on it, and that square symbol is the city symbol. So when you claim one of these crop fields, again, by placing one of your tokens next to it and then placing a farmer on top of it, this is worth as many points as the number of cities that have been claimed. So initially this is worthless, but as the game progresses, it becomes, depending on the number of players in the game, 5 points, 6 points, 7 points, and it keeps going up. So it becomes more valuable, and there's kind of this, waiting to pull the trigger. Is it valuable enough now to take? Do I have something better I can do? Because again, it's a one-shot score versus you scoring for the chains of pieces that you have between cities that can score again and again. So there's tensions that pull you in different directions, and it is such a classic Knizia design where you have a limited number of pieces for what you can do, and you initially have no idea what's worth doing, because of course what's worth doing depends on what other people do. If everyone is trying to place next to ziggurats, then everyone will kind of score the same because we'll roughly follow in each other's footsteps, and I got 2 and I got 3, and then you got 2 and 3 and you got 2 and 3, and it doesn't even really matter at that point. So you want to find the path that people aren't taking so that you can maximize that path. And I got to see that really well in my 3-player game. I played with 2 people who had not played before. They've played lots of games. They've played Knizia games. I tried to stress that you want to make connections so that you can score things repeatedly, but I was the only one who was really making connections with all of my pieces. And I did one point where someone was coming down sort of where I was, and I put my pieces around to just cut them off completely. And then they went and they built somewhere else. But I ended up connecting things all together. I scored a ziggurat. I got the ziggurat piece, the bonus power where I could play 3 different nobles at the same time. And I used that power only twice. But the second time I did it was the final play of the game because I surrounded 2 of the last 3 cities at the same time, including the city that scores for all 3 symbols. And I scored something like 60 points in that final turn because pretty much everything was connected across the board. Almost, not quite, but almost. It was just a huge score coming back from behind to go in the lead, where someone else had been dominating by taking lots of ziggurat points over and over again with different things, and someone else was piling up the cities and getting 5 points a turn. Whether or not they were completing a city, they would get 5 points from what they had already collected. So there's different ways to go and different things that are going to pay off over time. And even though I played 5 games, it feels like I've barely played it all because it feels like the game is open to lots of exploration and lots of different play styles, even though there's not much to it. Again, this is like a standard Knizia design where it's open to the player's style, and each player is going to bring something different to the game. And what works in one game might not necessarily work in another, depending on what people do. So you have to adapt to what people are doing, while at the same time trying to force a strategy through. So it's got the samurai element where you are surrounding locations and people are going to be claiming ownership. It has through the desert where you're making chains of your tokens, not because you're trying to carve off area for yourself, but because you're trying to score for those tokens repeatedly. And it's got a little Tigris and Euphrates. Mostly, I think of it as, well, it's like a lot of the other things that Knizia has, where you're going to draw tiles, you have choices in a rack. I can play any 2 of these, or maybe I can build up farmers for a turn and then blast out farmers all at once. So it's got these elements from all these different games, and yet it's its own thing. It's, again, I praise Knizia a lot, mostly just because I like his designs. I like his ability to remix what's come before. And I don't know whether this is a conscious remix or not, where you say this is 25% samurai and 50% through the desert, and you can divide up all the pieces for how this came together. It doesn't feel that way. It feels that way if you want to dissect the game and look at the different elements, but it also looks like a coherent, unified game that exists solely on its own. You could know nothing else about Knizia games, and you wouldn't think that this was pieced together from other games because it all works perfectly as is. So whether you know Knizia games or not, now you have an overview of Babylonia, how it works, and how you might want to approach the game should you play it at Spiel 19 or some later date.